This conference will now be recorded.
Oh, I've never heard that before. Did everybody hear that? So again, my name's Charla. I'm with Organizing Together. My background, I have a PhD in global governance and human security, and my background is working in conflict areas with organizations and building capacity for organizations. I predominantly used to work with immigrants and migrants in refugee communities. And then I switched over to organizational capacity as a whole for both for-profit and nonprofit businesses. And I spent much of my time building off of frameworks that the United Nations uses to build networks and relationships from my time working with them in West Africa and the Middle East. And so now I get to work here at home and help organizations in different industries build capacity. This specific assessment I used with my own nonprofit back in Boston called Refugees Welcome Network. We do very similar things as the Prevention Network, except we focus on immigrant services instead of prevention overdose. So I went ahead and drafted some notes, literally probably within the half an hour before this meeting. So if there are any typos, I'm sorry, I'll go back through and reread those. But I wanted to make sure that I had something written down for you as well, because you guys will be reviewing applications 3 times over the summer. And I'm sure the things that I'm gonna say now are gonna be easily forgotten later when we're all in a rush. So we're also going to videotape this, so you can watch it or read from the notes. Okay, does anybody have any questions before I begin? No? Okay, great. I sent over in the chat a link to the document. So if you haven't checked that out, please do, but I'll also have Hara email it to you after today with a link of this discussion, okay? So how many of you guys are familiar with organizational capacity assessments? Can I see hands? Okay, so we kind of have different levels of knowledge of what an organizational capacity assessment is. So I provided you with a little overview of what the goals are. So usually it's to determine the areas of strengths and weaknesses among institutional mechanisms within an organization. And for the MODA OCA, we want to use it to assess organizations' need for support, and then what kind of support that they're going to need to help them build capacity. Now, have you guys heard the term capacity before? All right, so it seems like we're pretty good with that term. But organizational capacity is obviously the level at which organizations are capable of delivering their services and also taking advantage of opportunities for growth. So scaling, when I talk about scaling, is that level, is increasing the level of organizational capability to deliver services and to take advantage of growth opportunities. So when we try to assess organizations for organizing together, we use a metric system. Lots of times when we assess an organization, we do it anecdotally, we do it from their proposal. We don't really know much about their internal structure or, you know, how the team of whether staff, volunteers, or members work together, whether there's any social cohesion between it, or maybe there might be some difficulties in leadership. So this assessment kind of allows us to extrapolate what aspects of organizational capacity that they might be able to improve upon. So this specific metric looks at leadership capacity. And so I've went ahead and written out so you guys can come back, but it's pretty much assessing whether or not the program aligns with its mission and whether or not the organizational leadership can support the prevention programming. It's important to have strong leadership, obviously, in organizations, and particularly organizations that someone with funding is looking to invest in. You want to make sure that there's strong leadership there and that the people in the organization is passionate about its mission. So we reviewed that. We also looked at operational capacity, which this looks specifically at whether an organization has sufficient funding. and that the general operations and the resources there to implement the overdose program are sufficient for what they're trying to do. Obviously, an organization wouldn't be coming and applying for a grant if they had, all operational capacity down. These organizations are looking for funding because they don't have funding in general and they need the support. So you're going to see almost all of the organizations have lowish or medium, operational capacity. We also do management capacity. So we're looking specifically at how they manage those financial and material resources, staff performance, and strategic relationships with their partners. Not many organizations have strategic partnership criteria like written down, and they rarely do assessments. So we looked at that in the OCA. The last aspect is the adaptive capacity, and that specifically looks at whether or not organizations used data metrics to achieve like sustainable impact. So do they have a theory of change? Are they monitoring that theory of change? Do they have indicators and criteria where they can provide real, tangible, evidence-based analysis around their impact? Is there any questions so far? No? Great. Great. So how is the evaluation used to select organizations to receive the grants? Now, obviously, the proposal itself is going to be really important. Does the proposal align with MODA's goals? That criteria is coming from MODA and the Prevention Network, so you'll have to talk to them if you have any questions about that criteria. But I really want the OCA to be used as an assessment tool to kind of understand whether or not the proposal aligns with their needs. And right now, research suggests that donors and foundations select organizations to receive awards based on arbitrary criteria and usually network connections. Organizations who receive grants in the past are 60% more likely to receive grants in the future. So that means like once the grant money comes in, it's easier and easier for those organizations to get more money, leaving some of them out to the side struggling to get started. An assessment of grant flows that I conducted with the University of Massachusetts on 7 cities across the United States show that the total grants awarded by foundations does not statistically relate with the socioeconomic characteristics of neighborhoods most in need. So that means that the funds have a tendency to go to more affluent neighborhoods, and they're statistically less likely to go to rural communities. So I hope that in the way that we educate our donors at Organizing Together, that we can bring that point home, is that the goal of this kind of mini grant is to target organizations who normally don't get state funding, who normally are smaller grassroots organizations, who often struggle with the grant process because they don't have the adequate technical skills to write a full proposal. That's why this mini grant program's proposal process is very short and more like short 2 to 3 answer questions. And so as we move forward, if you have any questions about kind of what that looks like, please feel free to email me or talk to Hara and we can get connected on that again. But I would like to curb these tendencies to give to the same organizations who already have quite a bit of funding from the state. And the survey will be able to provide you with that information. And I think it's also important for you to look at and maybe do a little bit more research on looking at their website, getting to know their leadership. Does their leadership, are they located within a community that is usually underrepresented or marginalized? Are they coming from a rural community with not a lot of resources? Those things should be high on your periphery and your judgment when you're thinking about how you want to assess these proposals. So the grant review board, you will receive a copy of the applicant's original survey assessment. This will have comments from me, Nadia, and Hara, just kind of writing down what their feedback was. So you'll be able to look at that information. That information wasn't shared with the organizations. The only thing that is being shared with organizations is their individual results in the form of a results packet. This gives them a score. You'll notice that on these packets, they won't have a rank, they won't have a percentage. I've been doing a lot of metrics with organizations for a long time, and we don't want to discourage them from participating by comparing them or ranking them to each other. I also don't want them to think that this is a competition to get the highest score, because the goal was to see where the areas of improvement are. And it has helped us do that by maintaining a good relationship with our stakeholders when we're doing these types of assessments. So you only will see scores, and then you'll see sections about each aspect of organizational capacity, and they'll be able to see if they scored between 1 and 6, this is what it might mean, and then through 7 to 8 all the way to the top score. So you'll receive a copy of that. I went ahead and provided an example of what that results is going to look like. I would really like it if you took a look at it and read it over so you kind of know what each of the scores mean. And so when you receive the original survey assessment and then you also receive the results, the organizations that scored high, so within the 75th percentile, which you can see on those individual survey assessments, those organizations probably don't need the mini grant as much as organizations who scored below the 75th percentile. Those organizations have a tendency to have a lot of funding coming in. They have a really strong management and operational capacity, meaning that they have a lot of documented procedures. They're doing pretty good in the fact that they do performance evaluations, and they might still be doing it on paper, which isn't always preferred, but at least they have these protocols and standard operating procedures in place. So I would suggest looking more at organizations who scored underneath the 75th percentile. Organizations with low scores in rural areas should be prioritized because they're in desperate need of capacity building services, and that would benefit them. Other organizations, they're not going to, go out of business because you didn't give them the mini grant. These smaller organizations in rural communities might, particularly because of what's happened with COVID, which has stopped them from being able to do fundraisers, in-person fundraisers in the way that they once could. And then often organizations with strong leadership and adaptive capacity show a strong commitment to their mission. So they'll be able to conduct performance assessments. They'll be motivated to actually work with a consultant or work on those capacity areas that they need to. Whereas organizations with weak leadership are probably less likely to take that money and turn it around into something that'll help them scale. So that's always to take that into kind of an understanding, is that when you're looking at these, if you come down to 2 organizations you're thinking of funding, take a look and see which one has the stronger leadership capacity score or the stronger adaptive capacity score, because that means that they have the capacity to succeed in their mission with strong leadership, and then also because they already have the capacity to do performance evaluations and monitoring and evaluation and the technical expertise, they just might need help maybe building a computer system that would allow them to do their evaluation quicker, more effectively for their organization. So I just wanted to make sure, because normally people are like, oh, well, if you scored high, then that's good and we should fund those people. But this kind of works the opposite way. We're looking to build out organizations that score lower so that they can become more sustainable. Any questions?
I just want to say I really appreciate that. Like, I haven't really thought about it that way before, and working for, a nonprofit that focuses services in rural communities, I really appreciate that viewpoint.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sorry. I agree, Charlotte. I think this is really helpful, and I appreciate you coming and helping and sharing some of this information, especially because you won't be a part of the review committee to eliminate any conflict of interest. So Hara, Nadia, and myself will be helping to facilitate the review committee meetings moving forward, but And Charlotte, of course, I'm sure you're happy to answer any questions as far as the.
Of course, as long as it doesn't have to necessarily do with a specific organization. Just for, just so you guys, full transparency, a number of the organizations, since we meet with them in these support sessions, have asked Organizing Together to consult with them with the mini grant program. So to remove any conflict of interest, I didn't want anything to do with actually selecting the organizations. And I actually wanted to kind of talk to you about whether or not you should actually remove the name of the consultancy in the proposal. I think that that might also increase transparency, just making sure that there's no bias and that, you know, you guys are favoring any organizations that are working with OT. I just want to make this feel as fair to all of the organizations as possible.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So, and maybe I misheard, but you talked about like checking out the different organizations' websites and that type of thing. So is this something like, how involved do you want that? Like, do we have conversations with people at those organizations beyond the application, or no, we just limit it to only what they've submitted?
That's a good question. I think that should be directed at Luis and Hara.
Yeah, I more so just thought that we would just, it's more just the application and the evaluation that we're going to be using. So the assessment using their scoring and the feedback that we wrote, that we typed out, the notes that we took throughout it and using that, and then using their actual proposal and using those both. Charlotte kind of went through and she did like the note taking. I don't know how to explain it. So she looked at our notes and then provided feedback through that. So it's like another level of feedback through her, but I necessarily didn't really think that you would be calling or, you know, doing any of that. Kind of how we'll be setting it up is that how me and Louise planned it is that I'll go look at the applications that are sent in. So we have a 48-hour deadline. So we're meeting on the 23rd. So on the 21st is the deadline of when they can submit it, and then I'll take those applications that were submitted and then assign it to half the group. So assign half to each, and I'll send it in a Google folder for you guys so you guys can review it ahead of time, the 48 hours in advance. So maybe just the day ahead, you guys can go through and look through the folder and look at them. And then I sent a template in the chat that we'll be using to fill out. And so we'll just kind of do it in a group setting. You guys will have reviewed, one half would have reviewed half of them, and then the other half would review the other half, and we just kind of bring it up in a discussion format. So I don't take too much time. You know, we're mostly using the assessment and the proposals to do it. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up though, Leah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And Hara will also be sharing the application right after this call, along with the forms you can see. It's a pretty brief form, like Charlotte mentioned, and there are very few questions, a lot of yes, no, organizational things, and then 2 or 3 sentences for the narrative sections. And that's just to help them. And then that will be attached to the assessments to help us as reviewers. And then we can discuss that on the calls. And I think Hara also shared in the document what we're going to be looking at is kind of based on each applicant. Are we going to give them a yes or a no, or a no with revisions? No never means flat out no. We want to help support as many of these organizations as possible. So if we don't feel like their application is strong enough this month, we might go back and say, and talk to them and help support them to make a stronger application and to make some of these revisions. So that's what we're going to be discussing. And then it could also be yes, but we don't fully understand this dollar amount. We would recommend a different dollar amount. And so that's listed on the sheet as well. And then that last column there that you would see on that document, just that Word document that Hara sent, is notes. And that's where we can share our notes. And Leah, for example, if you had a question for one of these organizations, or if you wanted some follow-up, someone from the MODA team could definitely follow up with this organization to make sure. That way you get your question answered, but you're not having to do all the legwork.
I just wanted to make a comment. Thank you, Charlotte, for what you shared with us as a funder. I actually have 4 RFPs out right now, and I'm currently working on our scoring tools. And, you know, I feel like this methodology kind of challenges the traditional way that I'm used to scoring proposals. And so, Louise, I'm glad that you just made the comment that you did, because my question was, you know, low score also concerns me. Like I understand the benefit of making sure then, like we're focusing on capacity and to provide funding to increase capacity. Like, why would we want to award those with the highest capacity if, you know, that it's like counterintuitive. So my question was, you know, the technical assistance on the back end of, okay, so now you're getting these funds, but we need you to ramp up some of these areas. And, you know, how much of that would be involved? I think that would help me in making a more thorough and thoughtful recommendation for funding. So thank you for clarifying that a little bit.
Yeah, and the reason why the methodology is set this way, because there's an inherent bias of anyone to assume that their knowledge or their ability to do things is better than what it is. So you'll see in assessments where organizations usually assume higher the score, the better. So they're willing to say that they're doing better at specific things than they actually are. And I find that when those methods are used, you know, and you're giving it over to them, again, we're missing that kind of between the 75th and the 25th percentile. The ones that aren't too low, again, like if they have low leadership or low adaptive capacity, I probably wouldn't, I'd be wary to invest money in those organizations. But to build capacity and make the biggest bang for our buck, I guess, is to target organizations that are somewhere kind of in the middle but low spectrum. Any other questions? No, that's great. And I am always available if you have questions over the next few months, obviously. And I hope that writing some of this down was helpful. And so please go ahead and go. We'll make sure to resend out that link to every time right before the application review process, okay? Just because I know it can be hard to keep track of all of the links.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charla. I'm going to send out a follow-up email, so don't worry about copying and pasting everything from the chat with all the links to everything for you guys. So that'll include the criteria. I'll even add the actual assessment in there so you guys can go through the assessment and look through what the questions and how we set it up for everybody. Yep, so look up for a follow-up email from me, and thank you guys again for joining us to go over that, and I'm excited to meet up with you guys next week to review the applications.
Thank you.
Thanks
Much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Leah.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, when are you in town?
Hey, Luis, if you want to send me the recording, I can put it up on our channel and then I can share the link.